At the Science and Environmental Council meeting previously as opportunities for improvement for natural environment. So is there anything missing from this list? Or is this enough to get you started on one of these topics?
Actually, right there, what I was going to say in terms of the market development, in terms of what do those people in
social equity and related to farming and economy.
I'm Nan. Did you hear something? No. You haven't done it?
I did. Go
Oh,
ahead.
you did? Oh, thank you. I'm Nan Summers, and I'm co-founder of Project Development Group, which is a sustainable team that won the Gulf Coast Challenge. So we're working everything from caviar and smoked sturgeon to botarga to making sure that there's gleaning food for all the
Condo Association membership has been very active in going out addressing, investigating a lot of these issues. And the reason being is obviously because it encompasses all the condo associations, the multifamily condo associations throughout the county itself. The president of the condo association just to ask his insight as well.
So you're looking at two different houses, and one has thermal pane windows, and the other, they just like it better, and it has single pane windows. So 9 times out of 10, they're going to pick the single pane window house just because they like it better. It's like a gut thing. It's not any. But if they had that information about how much energy the house was using, then they'd say, well, why, with all things being equal, why is this one less? And then it becomes because they're right.
I think education is something that we need to, it's educating everyone here and it's educating the kids.
I'm a teacher.
Right.
I'm trying.
And that's the one thing, grain barrels, using things that are, not damaging the earth, but actually encouraging us using the natural resources where the sun shines, state people. Use those natural resources, and it's education that's going to get it there. To me, that's the most vital thing.
Well, that kind of gets into the question of thoughts on would we like to dive into focusing on an action strategy for how to do better education versus
To make shared
Context or whatever.
context.
Okay, good. All right, let's get feedback from the others around the table.
Quick, it's just very quick. I mean, not that we have to. Can we have multiples,
No,
or
we
are
want
we
to
going
do
to
one
focus
action,
on one?
focus on one. If we have time for more power to us, but one is our goal.
I would say it's complicated to know what that means.
yeah. So we don't.
North of the USF campus, but he maintains an office there. Can't think of it.
His last name is
Vengroff, V-E-N-G-R-O. And I think he's also proposed the affordable housing for downtown, and it's at all kinds of walls.
I have a kind of suggestion, painting board, so that's a really good time to get these environmental policies updated.
Absolutely.
And one thing that we were looking at is having a tree credit, which is kind of
Anywhere. And they started with 8 gardens, they have like 42. So it's not any problems.
So one thing I want to add to the food waste thing, a big thing, rodents, from falling fruit and stuff. There's a variety of Indian duck that growth is great here. Indian runner duck, they're about tall, they don't really fly. They can be herded really efficiently with like a bamboo cane and a flag. They can be, yes, they eat mainly weeds and bugs. So they'll not only will they be
when they're small, they actually can train them They do that in some places in Japan.
Your city identifies some things as climate change, now you want all your money behind things, and now you've got a new airline. You've got nowhere to go, you're frozen, you're paralyzed. So you went back to that goal, obviously you've got to do that. You could also, really promote things like services like transit and Uber. And you could also design, as you're doing this hybrid kids educated versus people that may not, you can also plan those as partners. Okay. Because it's really easy to get how this kind of small space, comes about rectangular parking. It's not as difficult to have if you have majority approach, now delivering services to 6 economic and no one is that's the big
my take. I've never been in there on the side a year ago. Is there a way to, a lot of the little ones,
I've heard people talking about it, but still, yeah.
financial advisors, senior, whatever. I guess with a mindset of like, something like that. So maybe some kind of partnership. Make it in a very small scale, very willing to do it. People are saying, oh,
That's true, yeah.
Is that still no? That's not. It's just
Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I'm really eager to hear what you guys came up with. And with no further ado, here's Tim Rummage. There actually is a do, I guess.
Which one do you need?
Could you put up that last set of things? In a couple of moments, we'll hear what the different people recorded about the different discussions that they had. I just want to have you keep a couple of things in mind. A few years ago, we had the Summit for Environmental Action, and it generated essentially a series of 5 concepts that people were committed to trying to see and make happen in the community, and develop working groups around those to keep the conversation going, which is basically what we're hoping to come out of this today. Rather than just have everybody be able to sit in the room and have the conversation, part of the reason for developing the action plans was to actually then get people to commit to actually making them happen, so that they become acted upon plans as opposed to just something in a binder someplace. The other thing is we've already established 4 dates for different groups to meet on in the coming year. So on February 18th, Food and Social Services. On April 21st, the Natural Environment and Water. June 16th, the Built Environment and Energy. And on August 18th, Sustainable Economic Development. Okay. So I'll leave that up so you can, put these things on your smartphones and get reminded later. We might as well do these in that order. So who's going to be speaking about the action plan that got developed for food and social services? Is that?
I'm going to talk about food, but I need to
Okay. Okay. So obviously energy is needed over here.
Okay.
Social systems.
Yeah, that's me. So where you want to start?
Wherever you want to start.
Okay. So we were just asking what were the issues, and from the community survey, it was access to care, it was healthy weight, which means obesity for both adults and children, and it was also mental health and substance abuse. And so we asked the participants, all right, so what were things that are missing from this list? And some of the things that were listed were homelessness, community wellness, affordable housing, and education. And affordable housing was once again brought up in the second group. So who are the people working on these things? So there was a mention that we need to engage more of the neighborhood associations. I think really kind of an overarching theme that came from both conversations was that there should be more connectivity between some of the resources that exist and engaging residents that could really use them, and doing that through a bottom-up approach. That's not necessarily just, government telling people this is where to go, top down. We need to engage residents at a more holistic level to work on these issues. What else? So tools. Tools was the next part of that. So how are some things that can be done as far as strategies to overcome those problems that are identified? One mention was we need to have an open playground policy, to have, open up the schools after hours for organized play. If you want to increase physical activity through that mechanism to reduce the levels of obesity, that would be one opportunity. We could also have, expansion of some of the best practices. Sarasota is really doing a lot of good things, such as the Sprout Mobile Market, which is going into, low-income communities with fresh, healthful produce, and that's a great thing that we need to maybe look into how we can dedicate more resources to. There's also the mention of the Sunclose Gleaning Program. These are all great things, so really it's how can we get these expanded? That's something that was really mentioned as maybe a low-hanging fruit item. And really integrating more of those community efforts with institutions that are already out there, such as the schools, neighborhood associations, work through that grassroots level. And so just the final part was next steps as far as these measures, and we need to ask, organizations what they need from us first, and then connect them to volunteers. So there was mention of some type of clearinghouse for information and volunteer resources that could be done. Manatee County, for example, there was a mention of a whole child group. They connect low-income residents that don't have health insurance to those resources that they offer, and they go out and do outreach through the schools, through neighborhood groups, and even employers. That's one way. And so, there was all right, so if we need to bend that unhealthy weight curve, why don't we just do it through neighborhood organizations and maybe have a pilot program that maybe the county could start, and it could be basically centralized to where the county government organizes these voluntary walking groups and then kind of farm that out to neighborhood groups to really do it on their own. So it's not something that you really need to dedicate resources to from a government perspective. You're just organizing it and letting neighborhood organizations kind of take the lead and do it on their own, but just under the umbrella of maybe a voluntary program that the government can initiate. And so there was also, in the second conversation that we had with the second group, we need to look at where is the need and go directly engage residents on what they feel like would be strategies they want to see for this action plan. And that was the last thing that was mentioned. So I think that really covers all of the bases of our conversation.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, there we go. So I'm going to have to hold forth from the food table over here because I need to have my laptop plugged in. Both the groups at the food table worked on the same idea. I thought that's what we were supposed to do. Apparently, most groups had two different discussions, but we just went really deep in one. So the topic was food. Our strategy was looking at how to cultivate and expand permanent land access. Because as we know, land is expensive around here, and most people who are going into farming for the first time don't necessarily have a lot of capital. They're young people, maybe fresh out of college. So how do we provide an avenue for them to get into farming and grow this local food movement? And we looked at what are some possible routes for addressing this issue. They included forming a task force to investigate what lands are available and to match them with those who want to grow. Pretty good idea. Also, some maybe simpler steps, such as incorporating edible landscaping into county lands and establishing gardens and food forests within established communities, such as neighborhoods, church groups, etc. Another idea that came up in one of the presentations is creating land trusts and utilizing conservation easements funded by county or private investment or even crowdfunding strategies to acquire that land and then to lease it back at a very low cost for a very long time frame to sustainable growers. And then finally, changing land use and zoning policy to permit more urban agriculture. So those are some strategies for getting at land access. Who we took as, who do we need to have at the table here to make this happen? And just a few of the people would be people who manage and provide education for gardens, including, and maybe most especially, our master gardeners. Those who are interested in growing professionally, including 4-H members and Future Farmers of America. Local restaurant owners who might provide capital, like Ed Childs, who has purchased 1.5 farms to help feed his restaurant business. That could be a source of growth. Local foundations, especially the Community Foundation of the Gulf Coast, and Sarasota County staff and elected officials. Some of the tools that we have to make this happen. Managers of existing community gardens or school gardens can be a good resource for setting up new ones. The Natural Resource Conservation Service, which was a new one for me, can help with soil-related issues and might even provide grants for, say, infrastructure being added to land that hasn't been farmed before, like putting in water lines. USDA and Sarasota County Extension could provide support for research into what lands are available. Another tool would be underutilized county-owned lands. Our form-based code at the city level and hopefully at the county level as well. And property tax breaks for agricultural lands. And then finally, next steps, some things that we might get busy with, some baby steps, as we put it. Investigate best practices where this kind of thing has already been done in the country, where there really is a strong agricultural land access program. Collaborating with Sarasota Food Policy Council, Minnesota Food Action Committee, and Transition Sarasota. So tapping into places where similar conversations are already happening. Researching potential grants to help with acquisitions or infrastructure improvements. Interview aspiring farmers to find out what kind of arrangements would work for them, because we could come up with all sorts of great ideas, and then if it doesn't work for the people who are actually going to be doing the growing, we've just had a lot of wasted energy. And inquire with the county's property appraiser about currently available properties, and finally, find an existing organization that would be willing to house the project or create a new organization for that purpose. So a lot of great thought and ideas put into this, and like it says on the screen, we're going to be continuing this conversation on February 18th, and we have our sign-up sheet. We got a lot of people to sign up, including quite a few that said that they were willing to take on a leadership role, and I will pass this around if anybody else wants to sign up who is not at the not at this table. So thank you.
Natural environment and water.
I'll do natural environment first and you do water. Okay, so I had natural environment, 2 different groups. I'm going to mainly talk about the second group that we had. We had some really good ideas. And so we decided to focus on climate change and sea level rise and do an interactive art display or an interactive art project, and calling it Sea Level Rise is Already Here, looking at past, present, and future projected sea level rises through art projects, looking at historical photos and pictures of sea level rise that might happen in the future. So we were talking about partnering with the Chalk Festival and Sand Sculpture Festival and Student Art Projects, Ringling School of Art and Design, and other colleges and high school students and other students in the area. Also making sure that the standards are based on educational material and around those topics. Event sponsors, nonprofit educational partners, and voters. The tools that we would use would be how to discuss the impacts of climate change without scaring people. Don't use the terms that are polarizing, like climate change and global warming, because that might have lose some people right from the very beginning. The next steps we talked about, make it relevant to people that are affected and that can be advocates. Use incentives or disincentives to include families, participation of the majority of the households, bring the message to the people and make it easy and accessible to all. Some other forums that exist at Science and Environmental Council and the city of Sarasota, and Stevie's plans with sea level rise and the education and adaptation planning. Other opportunities would be looking at grant funding through the Arts and Cultural Alliance. The other group also focused on the educational portion of the discussion and possibly working with high school students and using forums with high school students and other students to talk about the natural environment, and also making sure that we reach other groups, multicultural groups, and having focus groups for them as well. That's it.
All right, our table had 2 sessions, 2 different things dealing with water. And we tried to look at water from an integrated standpoint, where it could be, drinking water, stormwater, wastewater, the whole scenario all rolled into one. So everything that I'm talking about kind of applies in a more holistic standpoint. And the first group, let me just get up to this. The first group, really, what we looked at as the most important strategies to deal with this was going to be education and incentives. Because as we all kind of know, if you educate people, that's all wonderful. But if you don't give them a reason to make the change you just informed them about, nothing ever happens. So consequently, we talked about the idea of, excuse me here. Okay. So as I said before, the what were incentives. Some of the things that we talked about as far as type of incentives would be a tree credit, where you would be able to get credit off your stormwater bill for the number of trees in your yard, or if you planted trees in your yard. And the same thing would apply to if you had like a rain barrel or a cistern on site. Anything that you did that would keep more of the water on the land as opposed to letting it be runoff would be justification for having a reduced or eliminated $90 assessment on your stormwater bill. And then when we got down to the who, literally most everything that we talked about would require either county or city board action. It's not something that the administration could do on their own as far as waiving fees and that kind of thing. It would be something that our basically elected officials would have to get on board with. The idea of providing incentives and also increasing budgets for education, that kind of scenario. And our next steps were the idea of, one of the things that we had talked about was creating a system where you could look at the concept of a water budget for properties, where you could ascertain any individual property in the whole county, how much water should they be using? And then are they? You know, basically looking at the water use that they have and looking at it from a perspective of saying, if they are using less than the amount of water you would expect for that property, then they should get some kind of a credit or some kind of a benefit. But if on the other hand they're using more water, then it would be a possibility of raising, you know, the actual fee for the amount of water they're using, or some other kind of penalty involved that would kind of dissuade them from using the excess water that they're currently using. And the next thing, what we looked at here, and again, I think that's pretty much it from the first group. So let me open the next group. Okay. Okay. Now the next one that we dealt with was primarily the idea of resetting expectations for homeowners. We originally looked at it in the idea of saying new homeowners who are coming in from somewhere else in the country, when they come here, instead of looking at subdivisions and water use and our current landscape practices the way we currently do, how would we go about resetting their expectations to the point where what they want to do in their community is going to be more environmentally friendly? So that is pretty much the topic that we talked about and the strategy. And then the what would be expand Florida-friendly landscaping type programs to provide education about watersheds and how the quality of what we do on our land affects the water that we have around us. The who would be condominium associations, homeowners associations, landscapers, and also our public officials, so that they understood why this is an important thing to be doing. The tools that we would be using would be educational programs that target helping residents understand how their home is a part of the greater watershed. And then the incentives could go to landscapers or to, you know, basically the homeowners association itself in order to hire having the things done that we would like to see done there. And the next steps would be, again, to create the incentives and promote them alongside educational efforts, because the two have to go hand in hand. And then the other idea was to look at existing other communities who are doing things the right way. whether it be within Sarasota County or not within Sarasota County, but to have concrete examples for homeowners and homeowners associations to go visit to see how to do it the proper way. And then the very last item that we had was figure out the groups, organizations responsible for carrying out education and the incentives that we would need to be putting forth. So that's it for our group.
Thank you very much.
Clarity in each of the jurisdictions to just be sure what's allowed where, and then develop a package for folks that would want to do this of what documents would be needed, templates, procedures, sort of a landowner training package for someone who would want to do that shared housing model. Some transformational education for potential tenants, outreach to churches and other organizations who could be sort of hosts for these, and working with developers to encourage them to do it in new construction. The second group chose to focus on auxiliary housing units, addressing a similar affordable housing challenge. And they said that many of them already exist but are illegal, so trying to find a way to make the existing ones permitted and then to encourage them further. So mother-in-law suites and accessory dwelling units and cottages in the back and such. They decided they wanted to look at researching the existing zoning codes and looking at what's allowed where in our community, looking for best practices in other communities, and then identifying hubs in Sarasota County where it would make sense to focus this further, and then doing some pilot programs in those. So where they already exist, where there's a retail center, that it would be walkable to add further accessory housing. And then some education components and also exploring potential incentives. So they both had similar stakeholders, realtors and planners and advocates and educators and all of that. And the next steps were to take advantage of some existing organizations that are already interested in moving on this. And those would be the Universal Design Coalition's Housing for All program, the realtors, and the USGBC. And so we're going to bring the people who are interested in working further and connecting with them with those existing groups to try to move it forward.
Hi everyone, we did energy at my table, and I'll just jump a long list of sign up on the sign up form to continue discussing and following up on that. And then both groups also discussed the need for education and diving deeper into how we can do better on getting the word out on programs that are already occurring in the community but aren't trickling down to all the stakeholders that need that information, and just improving the education overall on solar and energy efficiency. So those that needed to be involved in that were PTAs, neighborhood associations, school STEM programs, FPL, the county, city, extension office, Florida House, solar companies, manufacturers. And we also talked about our education being geared towards public officials, and also kind of that in-between age of in between millennials and the baby boomer generations, that kind of in between generations we talked about being maybe a good starter segment. And let me go to the other group real quick. The tools also, FPL offered to make a pamphlet with all the programs and energy audits that they offer and resources as a starting point, as a tool, but also really utilizing an online tool where residents or businesses can input their kilowatt hour consumption and some things about their home, where they can give, it can spit out basic recommendations, and just spreading the word on that online tool. So the next steps for that was to choose a leader, continue the conversations, and create the subgroup and get it going.
Great, thank you very much. I'll do the sustainable economic development. We did, as you have two groups, the first group kind of shaped the issues, and the second group shaped the process to move forward. we took into account the things that we talked about this morning in the two sessions, and also what Kate and John Thaxton had said. And the conversation began with, how do we develop a sense of place, and how do we help people sort of invest in the things that need to be invested in to make the community better. And excuse me. And essentially, the plan that has sprung forth is that we're proposing a sustainable, a socially responsible investment conference to be held here in Sarasota, probably in early 2017. We will be inviting outside speakers to come in. But in the interim, part of what is going to happen is we're going to be meeting with various community groups and entities to find out what are the investment needs of getting certain projects done. I mean, certainly the county and the city at this point can't necessarily afford to do some of these things, but Sarasota is either number 1 or number 2 in the country in the volume of people who have unearned, who's basically have high unearned income. There's lots of money in this community that is available for investment. And so the idea is to help them learn where they can actively invest in the community and see an impact of their investment while at the same time eventually getting some return on that investment. As I said, the focus will be first doing the community organizations, so that when we have the speakers come in, they are actually going to be dealing with information and data from Sarasota. So they're not going to be coming in to say, okay, this is what I did in a place in a region of the country that has no resemblance to you whatsoever. But here's how I can take my expertise, as Kate did this today, and say, here's how you can apply it locally. That's really what we want to have happen. And then part of this also is to take then the results from the conference. I mean, obviously, for one group of attendees, there's going to be the investment aspect that they will take charge of on their own. But on the community side, part of it is we want to be able to track what those investments do and be able to show people where that money went and what people got for that investment, whether or not it was new bike lanes, was it additional buses for improving mass transit in the area. I mean, what are the various needs, and how do these things manifest themselves? We also want to then take some of the material that's presented at the conference and turn that into various stages and levels of educational components that can be used at the different colleges and universities in the area, as well as the different high schools, so that we can start to help everybody in the community get a better idea of sort of the larger picture of how systems work and what are the positive benefits of doing local investing, and how do you determine where these opportunities happen to exist. Then also have some type of regular update in the local papers or local news as to what is going on and why this is important to be done. Right, and it's for Manatee and Sarasota County. I mean, it really is, a bi-county, approach. I know there is this, ridiculous line that separates them, but nobody believes that line anyway, and so why should we? And so it will be for both counties, and perhaps a little bit more of the focus inside the overall watershed to, as a way of keeping the linkage there. Some of the other conversations, because part of this is about how do you sort of get people to be more curious about what's going on in the area. Why do you want to buy locally? What are the opportunities for doing that? What are the benefits of doing that? And then what are the hurdles that need to be overcome to really make that work at a much larger and more effective scale? And so We've got a chairperson already. Apparently John will decide never to finish his thesis project, and we'll take this on. But part of that deal was that I ended up being the co-chair of this. And we have a functional, we have enough people to be a working committee. We will be happy to take on more individuals and move this thing forward. And as I said, hopefully in 14, 15 months, it will take place. So there we are. Thank you much. So at this point, we're in the world of raffles or just a general wrap-up? Huh? Both, okay. So again, the idea behind this conference, as I said before, was how do we come to appreciate the distance that we have covered in the last 10 years. And Sarasota, as far as sustainability is concerned, has really made some fairly major advances in what we're doing, how we're thinking about it. We've got sustainability into the comprehensive plans. We've got it into the building trade. We've got it into the educational system in our schools. We're promoting it at the primary needs level with what we're doing with water, what we're doing with food. And in the process of doing this, we've been able to identify, as Kristen showed with the health issues, where the gaps are in the process. We also are looking at developing some tools so that we can do a better cost impact. In the past, communities have done environmental impact statements. Part of our conversation we've been having is about how do you do or get people to do economic impact statements. If somebody wants to build a new marina, they come in with their fact sheet as to what is the benefit that this is going to have relative to that company, relative to that design. We also want to know what's the actual overall impact economically to the community. If you have the new marina, does that have some impact on water quality? Does it have some impact on fisheries issues? Does that have some impact on water and coastal access? So try to figure out a way to have a more inclusive conversation, because as we talked about this morning, we keep talking about green in an effort to get to sustainability, and sustainability is about how do all these things link together. And so again, that is the goal. And again, the way we sort of get to sustainability is by having people actually commit to working on these different groups that you've just heard about, and commit to making these plans reality, as opposed to just yet another piece of paper that sits in some file someplace, or was a good idea that has wonderful potential that will not be operated upon. We need to take that potential at this point and make it real. As you've heard on several occasions in the conversations today, Sarasota is really looking at a really near-term timeline for going from trying to be sustainable and wanting to be sustainable to actually being sustainable. I didn't hear anybody talk about a timeline that was longer than 20 years out. I teach it at Ringling, so all of these changes will happen by the time my students are 40, and we're either going to give them a relatively good Sarasota, a sustainable Sarasota to live in, or we're going to give them a reason to be very angry at those of us who did not give them a very good sustainable Sarasota to be in. And so, so we need to do this on the timeline. And so these action plans that people are developing are truly real. We have access to to the county to get the information to them. When the Summit for the Environment was done and we had the working groups that came out of that, there were changes in water policy. There were great conversations about solar energy, that really started to move forward. There were conversations about transportation that are still in existence and hopefully will be manifest. And so these are not going to be conversations that sort of fall away. We have the ability to get this information to the community decision makers, and in conjunction with social responsibility investing, we actually have the ability to make sure that there's some money behind these things to actually make them work and give them the opportunity to become real. And so that's why we're going to be asking you and following up to make sure that these committees actually get formed, the problems become addressed, that the action plans get developed, and the action plans get moved forward. Okay? So there's that part of it. And now, is there some basket that I'm supposed to pull? Ah, this thing. Okay. What are the prizes? There.
Got tree.
Tick, tick. That's it. Now, in the past, when we have done this, whoever had the first number came up and simply made the first choice. They choose, okay. So, so I have absolutely no idea what you win when your number gets called, other than the choice to determine what you have won, and then the next person gets the next choice, okay?
Yeah, or if it just takes it. Okay.
Okay.
You want me to pick, or do you want to pick?
No.
All right.
I got enough things landing on my head today, so that.
Is there a lane here? Elaine, number 274478. No? Okay. Gotta be present to win here. Brianna, 274447. Yeah, that's you. You can pick anything you want here. All right, let's keep this going here. That one doesn't have a name.
Good choice.
All right. Madeline Hanson, 274360. Oh, yes, yes.
Good,
Sure,
good story, Jack. Good story. Yeah. Yeah.
Donna Juliet, 274418. No, Donna? Oh, there you go.
All right.
John Myers, maybe 274425.
Hey, here we go.
Put these down here.
Do I have to turn in my room and take it?
Sure, that's fine. Thank you. Trust you. This one doesn't have a name, but 274540. No one? Going once? This one doesn't have a name either, but 274541.
Yeah.
All right, Rebecca. Sherry Lee, you still here?